Welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. We're diving deep into the intricate layers of the 7-stage generational wealth model to offer invaluable insights on legacy building, wealth accumulation and preservation, and financial growth across generations. I'm Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and this is the New Wealth Wave podcast.
Hi, my name is Dr. Joaquin Wallace, the host of the New Wealth Wave podcast. First and foremost, I would like to thank all of our guests who appeared in quarter number 2 of the New Wealth Wave podcast. But guess what? We're moving into quarter number 3. But before we get there, let's take a look at some of the highlights of quarter 2. And let me give you a little background on Mr. Sabri. He's an award-winning thought leader on financial trauma. He's a financial therapist, and he's an accredited financial counselor as well. And he's also written a book called Financial Irresponsible. Now, Rakim, thank you for coming on the show this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I really like that the model focuses on the future as well. So I think a lot of conversations stop at, okay, this is what happened to you in the past. These are the steps that we can take to help navigate where you are in the present, but doesn't really spend a lot of time on focusing within the generational wealth accumulation and internally distribution. And so I think that you focusing on that in this model is very important, because we hear the term generational wealth tossed around quite a lot, but I don't think that there are too many examples that speak to how to actually execute on that. One of the truths that I've realized in my experience is that mentorship has played a role, right? I've had people in my corner reinforce the abundance mindset and point out where I have limiting beliefs, or demonstrate through their own behaviors where this is possible. You just have to do it. I find that within the Black community, that mentorship piece is missing, and it's difficult to drive because so many of us are operating from a place, even in experiencing success, are operating from a place of competition rather than collaboration, are operating from a place of kind of scarcity, but a different kind of scarcity than we've discussed. Scarcity in that, don't rock the boat, or you have to work twice as hard to get just as far, or you have to talk this way or dress that way, or, put your head down. Like, there is a kind of like a falling in line that I notice as we climb socially that says this is how you're supposed to show up. And people who haven't arrived to that point, who feel as though they are being true to themselves in that moment, are very resistant to, why do I have to be somebody that I'm not? Ask me, why did I write Financially Irresponsible? I didn't see too many published books that had a Black face on it talking about money. Now I see so many, and I'm super excited about it. Black and Latino friends that I have, personal friends that I've had, that I have acquired over the years, over the last 2 years specifically, releasing books talking about their experience culturally in money, talking about their experience in financial trauma or financial therapy, talking about their experience in college, navigating, student loan debt. You asked the question about the financial influencer. What I'm seeing as a shift occur is that a lot of these financial influencers who look like me are going and getting the credentials so that they can back up what it is that they're saying, and so that they can kind of push back at the people who just paint them with a very broad stroke and say, oh, you're a financial influencer, but you're not a financial professional, so we shouldn't really be taking you seriously. And I'm excited about that. I love that.
First and foremost, Sandra Davis is a highly, highly respected financial planner, educator, and coach who has dedicated her career to helping people achieve financial stability and prosperity. Her work involves creating frameworks to ensure that individuals from all income and wealth backgrounds have access to competent and ethical financial guidance. Before you became an advocate in this financial literacy and educational space, where were you on the model?
Ooh, honey, I don't think the model goes that deep in debt. Yeah, so I would say I was in between stage 1 and 2. And let me say why. So how I interpret stage 2 in my language is the legacy burden. So I had the legacy burden of financial beliefs behaviors, and I think attitudes is probably fair, that were harmful. And then I was existing, and still exist, quite frankly, in the external environment or ecosystem that is not kind to Black women. And so in addition to the racial wealth gap, I've also got the gender wealth gap. I got all the gaps, none of the benefits, even if you ignore childhood. But childhood is where I learned a lot of those things. The legacy burden, in addition to these external topics that, I'm sure you talk about on this podcast all the time, right? Being in a system of oppression for people who have experienced poverty, come from people who have experienced poverty and enslavement. And, even in the San Francisco Bay Area, I remember when redevelopment moved my family out of the Fillmore district. I remember when my mother could no longer afford our home, which completely disrupted my life at 15. So for me, that stage 1 and stage 2 were kind of collapsed, I would say, into one. So that's where I was. I don't use wants or needs in my conversations with myself or others. I have living expenses. What does it cost me to operate my household? And then I have lifestyle expenses. What makes my life better? And then I get to decide what goes where. And so I'm never judging anyone on what do they have a want that I think they shouldn't do. And that's what financial literacy can do. It can say, well, your needs should look like this and your wants should look like this. And if you have any debt, you shouldn't be messing around with your wants. Well, that's insane. That's insane. Why would I go to work every day to not do what I want? If I'm in perpetual poverty, why would I not run through McDonald's with my kids so they have a little bit of joy instead of cooking at home when I'm already exhausted from my third job? So we have all these judgments and all of these behaviors that we have toward people that are counterproductive to what we say we're trying to do. People say folks don't want to talk about money. I think that the finfluencers show us the opposite. Everybody wants to talk about money. They just didn't have a place to do so. They didn't have a safe place to do so. And now everybody's talking about it because they want to, always wanted to. And we get to make space for that. The rub is, are the people talking competent in what they're talking about?
What do you think about all of the financial influencers that are out there that are using TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and things of that nature to put their message out?
I think there are some great folks who really strive to give good information for the benefit of the people who follow them. I think there are also other people who, they say, oh, well, I did it and you can too, without regard for the fact that they may be spewing something that the people who listen to them really can't do. I love when people talk about, oh, well, you should be budgeting 50, 30, 20. Try that in the Bay Area. Try that in San Francisco. And so what I appreciate about the financial influencers is that they have raised the conversation to a level that financial professionals not only didn't try to do, but wouldn't effectively have been able to do. So I am grateful that they do that. I do wish that they were more accountable for good information. It is disturbing to me that there's so much advice around investing that's really, I'm just teaching, but we are actually providing investment advice, often unqualified to do so. And people would say, well, Sandra, how do you determine what was qualified? There really are some wrong answers.
To help lead the discussion will be Brian L. Thomas. Brian is a speaker and mentor who helps students develop financial literacy and accountability as they prepare for their independent financial lives. What was your aha moment that made you realize that you needed to make a change?
Well, it was definitely not early enough. I had some financial trauma that I had to deal with in high school and shortly thereafter. But the real aha moment came shortly into my marriage. My wife and I were married relatively young, and we had a young daughter, but we were still not fully prepared, I think, for the realities of life. So the aha moment came one day when I had a stack of bills and I was just, frustrated with living paycheck to paycheck. And I realized that something had to change, and what had to change was me. Students are really passengers in their parents' financial lives. So they're focused on other things other than money because they don't necessarily recognize what it costs to raise them, right? So I think some of the primary challenges for students isn't necessarily money when it comes to their focus. I visited a few schools this week, and certainly that's what I'm hearing from the educators. So unfortunately, financial literacy has taken somewhat of a back seat when it comes to not only the curriculum, but in terms of the focus. Certainly your lifestyle at home and your parents' success with money and their status has an impact on you as a student. If you're a student and you're coming to school hungry, you may not be able to focus on studies. And so I do think that there's a big influence on, like you said, stage one, on their ability to not only do well in school overall, but to be able to think beyond their current circumstance. We can't just give our kids everything that they want. And the more that you're well off financially, the riskier it is, the harder it is for you not to say no and to give them things, because we always want our kids to do better than we did when we were their age. We want to give them more than we got, but we really need to teach them the things that we didn't. And that's much more important than giving things, is giving knowledge. As you said,
generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. The one thing I'm going to take away from this, kids are the passengers in the parents' financial life. And I wrote that down because that is so true.
As we've been discussing, it starts at home. I think at home, you begin to have your children be exposed to what it is to manage money. So at the grocery store and things like that, you need to involve them in some of those financial decisions. They need to learn to make choices and trade-offs. At school, there are resources that can be provided for the school to build the proper curriculum, specifically grade-specific curriculum. And so I can share some of these resources with your listeners so that they can tap into some of these. Some of these are directed specifically at parents. Some of them are directed at educators. And some of them are directed at people like myself who are advocates who want to get trained so that they can train others. And so I do think that at school and at home, there are lessons and practical things that you can do, but you don't have to kind of figure them out on your own. There are lots of resources available.
To help lead the discussion will be Martin C. Johnson. Yes, that name is familiar. This is Martin C. Johnson, who was our first live guest on the New Wealth Wave podcast. And so it was so good, we said, why not do it again? Can a trust protect assets from creditors?
Yes and no. Once again, you said a trust. So an irrevocable trust, if you transfer your assets into an irrevocable trust, remember, irrevocable, you lose control, but the assets are in there for your beneficiaries. If you then get sued, your creditors cannot access those assets that have been moved into an irrevocable trust. Any assets in a living trust, for you, the grantor, the person who put the assets in, the person who is now the current trustee and you're managing those assets, if you get sued, a creditor would be able to access those assets. The easy way to remember is if you can get to it, your creditors can get to it. You can get to it, your creditors can get to it. If you then get sued, your creditors cannot access those assets that have been moved into an irrevocable trust. Now, that same trust, if you are out of the picture and one of the beneficiaries gets sued, that beneficiary's assets are protected because the beneficiary does not control the trust. So if your son or daughter is a beneficiary of a trust and they get into an auto accident and it's their fault, and the plaintiff finds out that they are the beneficiary of a trust, there's not much the plaintiff can do to get to those assets. But once the money is given to your son or daughter and it lands in their bank account and it becomes their money, then one of their creditors can access those assets. Obviously, they have to go through court and get a judgment, but yes, they would be susceptible. The number one benefit is that it takes the property out of your name and thus it takes it out of your taxable estate. Now, most people these days are not going to be faced with estate taxes. Nationwide, it's $13 million that you can leave to someone estate tax free. But as we know, there are some very wealthy folks, and let's say they have $15 million of estate assets they want to leave. Using an irrevocable trust, they could move $3 million of assets to an irrevocable trust, gets it out of their name, and that's going to reduce their taxable estate from 15 million down to 12. That brings them below the estate tax level. That means that 12 million can go to their heirs estate tax free. And that 3 million that moved over into the irrevocable trust, that is not going to have any estate taxes because it's now out of that person's name. Digital assets are becoming more and more prevalent. And one of the things that I provide in my electronic emergency binder is a way for people to list their account, their usernames, and their passwords. And we instruct people to keep the passwords in a safe place, but the usernames and the account information could be kept in your estate binder so that if someone passes away, at least they could go to the binder and see, oh, he has PG&E, he has Travis Credit Union, he has this, and they'll see the usernames, but the passwords should be in a safe deposit box or a safe. One other thing, Dr. Joaquin, there are some digital services online where you could designate someone to be your successor for all your passwords in the event that you do not respond within a certain number of days of your trusted person asking for access.
And to help lead the discussion will be Desarte Yarnway, who is the founder of Yarnway Wealth Management, a firm focused on helping business owners and professionals live their best lives. Desarte, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, Dr. Wallace. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It is an honor and a privilege to be here talking to you about something that's really dear to my heart, and I look forward to the conversation. I love the model that you've created, and I think it's a mental model that a lot of people can resonate with and attach to. My entry point in the industry was working at a very reputable firm, and they called their financial advisors investment counselors. And while their business model didn't support the fact that they were investment counselors, I really took to that name because I thought that an advisor has two jobs. On one end, they're supposed to be money handlers, right? You're essentially supposed to be good stewards of a person's financial assets. But on the other end, you're supposed to be a counselor, somebody that they can sit on this, couch, sort of like going to a therapist, understand their fears, their concerns with money. And if you marry those two things together, you have a recipe for success. So I think this formula really, really encapsulates all of the different components about money that people have. And if they're following it and going through the stages, they can really make significant difference in the way that they view and use the tool of money. It's funny that the stages, right, are written in this way because I think that some people, especially those that may have legacy businesses or legacy wealth, right? It's like they're already financially well off. They think they have knowledge, but they kind of don't, right? And then they're kind of doing it the reverse way. So I say that just to say, like, there's many ways to explore these stages, and everyone's starting point is different. You can be born into wealth, but still have financial trauma that you have to go back and retroactively fix. Right? You can have nothing and still have to heal the financial trauma of having nothing and then getting to the point of being in a financially well spot. And I find that no matter, if your business grosses $10,000 or $10 million, there are these things that people just don't know and they need help with to ensure that they're in good standing, but also that they're treading towards their goals in the right way. So I think the biggest barrier for a lot of people is just like, I don't know what I don't know, but I know I'm good at creating this product, this service, and I need you to help me, fill in those knowledge gaps so I can be the best version of a business owner that I can be. This is the thing. Information is free. Implementation is expensive. So I am not mad at people trying to build their influence by sharing information, but actually implementing that information to a degree that is beneficial for the end client or user is very difficult, right? So my differentiation is my philosophy, alignment with financial advice, right? And then number two, the implementation of that philosophy. And I think doing is always going to be harder than just knowing, right? So I think it's quite simple. I know it's anticlimactic, but the doers are the ones the future belongs to, right? And I think what you're experiencing online are just people that have information. Anybody can log on and get the information, but it's the doers that the future is reserved for. So, I'm focused on doing, I'm focused on creating, right? And by doing that, you change your own, not only wealth trajectory, but you change your impact along the way.
Dr. Michael G. Thomas. This guy here, let me tell you, he's an accredited financial counselor, an ACE. He is a lecturer at the University of Georgia as well. He's an author, Black Financial Culture. Dr. Thomas, thank you for coming on to the show.
I appreciate you having me, Dr. Wallace.
Before you became an advocate in this financial literacy and educational space, where were you on the model?
It always had a knack for wanting to understand money and being involved in the financial space, but it was very just kind of academic in nature, meaning just basic things, budget, invest, but not understanding nuance and context like your model builds out. And as we would think about when we talk about systems theory and internal systems, external systems, and you're an agent navigating an environment, and then how these things interact, and then how we engage, and all these different things, my mind wasn't there for a very long time. We can talk about upper middle class, wealthy, so on and so forth, right? And it was in that moment where I had a revelatory event for me in terms of seeing myself outside of myself and how I'm existing within the systems that I'm navigating. So I wanted to be vulnerable, to demonstrate vulnerability and authenticity, so that someone who has been worried about being vulnerable to their unique experiences because of feelings of judgment, shame, guilt, or whatever it may be, it would free them up so that they can engage in their own journey of vulnerability. So now that we can engage in this process of healing and then ultimately working towards warmth and then being in the Black as it relates to their financial lives. That was the point of the book. It's academic without being academic. It's a horizontal relationship. I'm talking to the reader, not at the reader. And in the very end of the book, I basically end with this proclamation, which is, at the end of the day, Black financial culture is your choice. It's not for me to tell you what it is, because the whole point of having freedom is choice. So for me, it's whatever you decide to do with your resources, with your money, I just need you to own it. That's the book, Black Financial Culture, Building Wealth from the Inside Out, because it's my perspective that wealth creation does happen inwardly and then manifests itself outwardly. What I've learned over the years is that when we don't address the things inwardly and we get wealth outwardly, what happens is that we use wealth and resources to self-soothe things inwardly and to fix things inwardly that money in and of itself does not have the capacity to do. And that's why you'll have people who can run into large sums of money and then their lives are a ruin and they're a wreck because we thought that money in and of itself was going to be the saving grace. Money does not have the capacity to love us back. And that was a theme that was in the book, that we need to start with self-love and then navigate what that process looks like in order to then be the best version of ourselves so that we can position ourselves to acquire more, but to do so sustainably. That was the spirit of it, but it had to be done because it was sitting in my core. There was no way that I was going to have peace if I didn't write it.
And as we always say, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. So on behalf of my producer, Ray Haycraft, myself, Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and all of those future wealth builders who subscribe to the New Wealth Way podcast, thank you for your continued support. And I'll see you in quarter 3 of the New Wealth Way podcast. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on the New Wealth Way podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Our show is edited and produced by Ray Haycraft. To dive deeper into the world of financial wisdom and learn how to create your financial footprints, head to our website at www.drjwallace.com. For more updates and exclusive content, connect with us on social media by searching Dr. Joaquin Wallace. And if you have questions and comments, feel free to email us at thenewwealthwaypodcast@gmail.com. Remember, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And as always, thanks for listening. The content presented in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes and should not be taken as investment advice. The views and opinions expressed by our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the New Wealth Way podcast and its host or producers. Listeners are urged to exercise discretion and judgment before making any financial or investment decisions. Always consult with a financial professional or advisor before taking any action based on the content of this podcast. If you're enjoying the New Wealth Way podcast, we appreciate if you leave us a review. We're always open to topic suggestions and guest recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us directly with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the New Wealth Way podcast.